Are just joining us, I'm Lauren from RDU on Stage, and I'm with the amazingly talented Sonny Kelly, who has written and stars in this amazing play called The Talk, which is now available virtually through July 10th. And I hope everyone will take the opportunity to watch it. It's a powerful, amazing piece. And so thank you for joining me
I'm
today
glad to be here. Thank you
for
for
this
inviting me.
talk.
Yes, for this talk, we were talking earlier about how the show The Talk has multiple meanings, right? It's the talk that I had with my son when there were riots in Baltimore back in 2015. My son was 7, and I had to explain to him the cause of this talk and the reason. And racism in America is mind-boggling, right? But what I worked out through that process of writing the story and developing it as a play and performing it was that we as Americans need to be talking about this. This is not a Black issue. This is not something that only some communities should be talking about. We should be talking and talking with each other. Right?
And one thing we said literally 3 seconds ago before I pressed the live button is white people, especially, I think, and I'm speaking as a white person, we suck at talking about race. This is just not something we're comfortable talking about. We'd rather sit silence. We'd rather just kind of whisper words, certain words to our friends because we don't know, we don't have the vocabulary, we're not able to talk about it. So, in your experience developing this show, what and even working with school children, I know you're a youth pastor.
Yeah.
What, why is it so hard to talk about race in
Let,
America?
let me first say it's not because white people are inherently bad at it. Not at all. It is simply because white people don't have to talk about it. When you don't have to do something, you tend to not do it, right? I kid all the time. Like I have a really good metabolism. My dad has blessed me with, I stay pretty lean. So I don't work out that often because I don't have to. But give me a few years. I'm gonna be in the gym hustling, trying to be, trying to maintain muscle. But I mean, if you don't have to, you've got that privilege, right? That's part of what we talk about privilege. And so the challenge that I've seen is that Black people in this country and people of color, but I'll speak from my perspective as a person who considers himself Black, and most of the world considers me Black. Black people, we feel like we have to talk about race with our kids in order to protect our kids, to prepare them for the slings and arrows that may beset them, that probably will beset them at some point in time. Because we live in a country where racism is ever present. It's better than it ever was before. We're doing better as a nation. Let's acknowledge that. And it is still ever present. It's a precarious situation to walk out into the world as a Black person, knowing that any given time you could be dehumanized or criminalized by people with power, right? It just is what it is. So we talk to our kids about race as a requirement to protect them. White people realize that if they talk to their kids about race, they may put guilt onto them. They may have questions that they don't know how to answer. It gets kind of icky feeling for them. So they don't talk to their kids about race in order to protect them. So we both have the same end in mind. We want to protect our kids. We're just doing diametrically opposed actions, right? We're doing opposite actions, not because of the other people, not in any reason, not in any way what's the word, to set off the other one, but just because we're trying to keep our respective kids safe. And my argument is we should all be talking about race and racism because racism is not an ideology. It is rather a toxin. It's something that makes us sick. And I think in this pandemic, we can relate to this analogy. In the pandemic, we know that there is a little virus called the coronavirus, COVID-19. And if that virus gets into your system, it will make you sick. And it kills people and it kills whole communities. And so if we understand racism as that, explain it to our kids in that way and say, hey, difference is good. We're all different. Your friends of different colors, different backgrounds, etc. It's when we take those differences and we get infected with the mindset that some differences are better than others. Some differences make you a bad person. Some differences make you a person I don't want to be with. That's when we have to stop it and say, no, we're not going to do that.
I also think, as a white parent myself, I've got two children, and my daughter just graduated from high school. My son is going into his senior year of college. So they're older. But when they were younger, especially my son, so when my son was younger, my husband and I I remember looking at him as a toddler saying, we're not going to teach him to see color. We don't want him to see color. And as I've grown up and I've educated myself and I've spent time learning, you and I've talked about learning, um, that's bullshit. We have to teach our kids to see color because that's where the whole problem comes from. By teaching them to be colorblind or not see color, we're almost giving ourselves a pass not to talk about race.
Yeah. I talk in the beginning of the show when I break the ice, and the first time I break the fourth wall and really engage my audience and challenge them to have the talk. I say, we live in this age of the post-colonial, the postmodern, the post-racial, the post whatever else you want to call it, where Black lives matter, right? And blue lives matter, right? Hey, all lives matter. And yet somehow we all end up sadder because we need to talk. Now, see, we can talk all day about what should be, and I respect the notion, the concept, the theory of colorblindness. It's a very noble concept, but it is but a concept. It is what should be. What is what's on the ground. What is what's burning through the streets of our cities right now. What is what's in the morgues, Black bodies that have been killed and brutalized that we just never caught on tape, right? That's what is, right? And so if we can learn to deal with what is, as uncomfortable as it may be, maybe we can start to work toward what should be, right? But you're right. I think that it is doing a disservice to your family and to everyone else around to pretend that we can be colorblind in this country that has been so racialized from its core that we have to contend with that if we're going to actually have realistic conversations with each other.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I want to talk about, where I have begun to open my mind, open my heart, um, about having conversations about race is through gateways. I think, the gateway of being family, the gateway of religion, whatever the gateway is for you to make that connection. And so I want kind of the theme of our conversation to be these gateways, because I think that's a key, to how we connect and understand with each other. And one gateway I found in your play that was so meaningful to me in talking about race was the familial aspect of your play. I mean, this play is all about family. It's deep rooted. I mean, it starts with the talk you're having with your son, or the talk you realize you have to have with your son as a first grader. Um, and then springboards from there. And there's so many characters in this play: your grandmother, your mother, your father, your son. You play all of them. Talk to me about your upbringing and your relationship with your family when you were a young person, as you were growing up.
I will say this. First, let me just preface this with my favorite part of this piece is performing my family members, people whom I love and have admired for all these years, my grandmothers, my mother, my father. And it's really a lovely experience to hear the feedback from audience members to say, the only thing I would change is more family. I love the family stuff. Bring more family in. I'm like, cool, I can do that. And so it's really great to see that we're reviving in that way. But growing up, I grew up in California. So I grew up in an area in the 80s and 90s where there was a lot of what we would call diversity, in the sense that I was never in a monolith. I always had, for example, mostly Latinx, Asian, and white people around me at any given time, with some smatterings of Black folks. But oftentimes on Sunday, we would go and I'd be around a lot of Black people. So I felt like I had a lot of different settings, different areas of entry, gateways, so to speak, into different cultures. And so I grew up being kind of an open-minded, very comfortable in my own skin person. But every once in a while, my Blackness would rise as a limiting factor in some people's eyes. I was the only Black kid in all of my honors classes, all of my AP classes. I never had another Black kid in that class, no class. If there was a new Black girl that came to school, me being a heterosexual male, there was a new Black girl that came to school, everybody's like, oh, Sonny, you must like her. I'm like, dude, I'm not the only show in town. And so sometimes I was isolated in those ways. I just kind of found ways to finesse it. That's one reason why I like to perform and act, and I'm a public speaker. So I found ways to finesse it, but I never forgot that I knew I was different. And I was reminded that I was different in those ways. But in my household, with my family, it was all about hustle and hope. I kind of, there are a lot of binaries that come up in the show. And hustle and hope is one of them. And that's it. They taught me to work hard. My grandmother was a cleaning woman all her life. And I remember when I was in the Air Force and I was training in Texas, and she lived in Aransas Pass, Texas, South Texas, near the coast, near Corpus Christi. And my dad would have me go and mow the lawn and go and visit her. It's about 2 hours away from the base where I was. And I remember every time I would see my grandmother, she would be like out at somebody's house. Like I would come to visit her and she'd be out cleaning. And she wasn't supposed to be. She was in her late 70s. My father is, an educated man. He's a teacher. He was sending her money back. I would shake $20 bills into her hands. I learned that's something different, by the way. It happens in Black communities and especially socioeconomically challenged, low wealth communities. We tend to pay what some people call a Black tax or a poverty tax. When we visit our elders, we give them money. I would never leave my mother's house without shaking a $20 bill in her hand or $40 into her hand, because that's what you do. They didn't have savings. They have mattresses, right? And they're usually helping and feeding a bunch of other people. So you always try to bless up. It wasn't until I got older in life that I realized, oh, there are meemaws and peepaws and grandmas out there. They give you money all the time, right? Now I will say my grandmother in Los Angeles, she was much more like that. My grandfather was a police officer, and my mother's father was a police officer, and they were much better off. So we got more of that traditional experience. But with my grandmother in Texas, I remember being in my 20s, and she was 77, 78, and she had a machete, and she was outside just chopping away at stuff like a woman in her 30s or something. And I'm like, I'm trying to stop her, like, Grandma, Ma, you're not supposed to do that. And she fought me. She was like, no, this is what I do. She was determined to continue to hustle because that was what was in her. It's kind of the American spirit, but it's that indomitable spirit that says, I don't care what you throw at me, what racism or oppression, I will transcend it. So my parents put that in my head early in life. Life is tough. We're not going to pull the race card if you don't have to. If it's time, pull it. But we're not going to pull the I'm oppressed, I don't. No, you just press through and you hustle. But then also holding on to hope, acknowledging the fact that life is tough, and sometimes it's tough in ways that it should not have to be tough. We're going to hope and work for better for the next generation. So my father grew up in the segregated South. He grew up in abject poverty. I'm talking like he was from the age of 7, 8, he was fighting hustles on the street, shining shoes, trying to work. He's my favorite character to play because he's just unstoppable. He became a Marine. And when he became a Marine at the age of 18, he wanted to get out of the segregated South and try a new life. They told him, hey, you should get, he had not been circumcised. I promise I'm gonna take you to a good place. He said, he had not been circumcised and said, hey, you're gonna be a Marine now. You're gonna be in the mud, dirty settings, you should get circumcised. This dude's like, okay, no brainer. Gets circumcised at 18, who does that? Not for a religious purpose, just because he was told it was a good idea. Goes back to training and finish. So my dad is just that kind of guy. And he always has kept his eyes above the horizon and has always expected more for his children. So he went on to get his master's degree and became a teacher in the Compton School District, LA schools, and taught in Compton. And I always just really admired how he was always had a hand out to help people and encourage people and always just kept working. And I mean, to this day, he's always finding something to do to help other people around
I love that. Hustle and hope.
him. Yeah, there's a part in the show where, Ma, God rest her soul, is gone now, but I mean, she worked doing something to her last days. And we realized we needed to stop trying to stop her from working because it was part of what was keeping her alive, that hustle. But there's this beautiful part in the show, and you'll remember this, and she was deaf. So she would always say, get your lesson. That's how she talked, kind of in the back of her throat. Get your lesson. And Ma was deaf, so no concept of volume control. All the kids would be like, what is she saying? And whenever you were reading a book or doing your homework, she would come over you. And if you pause for a second to, I don't know, breathe or think, she would square up on you like she was willing to fight you. And she would say, go Russian. But as soon as you went back to reading or doing your homework or whatever it was, she would just sit there, quiet as a mouse, and just stare at you. And I remember being the object of her affection. She loved me, she loved us, but when we were studying, there was this admiration, there was this respect, there was this hope, this glint in her eye, like, yeah, you're doing what I need you to do. She stopped school in the 7th or 8th grade, and she was deaf, and she was a woman, and she was Black in a time when it was very difficult to succeed. So she looked at us as the baton carriers, So when I talk about hustle and hope, I saw her work ethic, and I took that on, but then I also saw that hope, and I said, man, if she can look at me that way, maybe there's something in me. Maybe there's some more I can and should be doing. So that's why when I went to high school, I took the AP classes and the honors classes, because I had people that were behind me that had invested hope in me. And I had an obligation to serve that hope, to carry it out.
Mm. I love that. And I will say one of the most memorable characters in the play is your grandmother. I told you Kim saw the show over a year ago, and she and I just spoke over the weekend, and I said, you know, I'm interviewing Sonny on Monday, and she said, you got to ask about the grandmother. Got to ask about his grandmother. I love that character.
That's Grace Lillian Kelly, and she had a tough life, man. She had some kind of illness, some kind of fever when she was young. Her father, Tom Scott, and by the way, she always would tell me that I remind her of her father. Tom Scott, slender man, much like my build. Whenever I'm eating food, I always like to lean forward. I have to be careful in this interview not to lean forward too much. That's just my standard kind of position. I'd walk in, she'd walk into a room and I'd be eating her food with my elbows on my knees, and she would say, Tom Scott. And again, this joy, this hope that she would look at me with was just overwhelming, because Tom Scott, my great grandfather, was just an admirable man. He always worked in the sugarcane fields, earned enough money to buy his own land in Louisiana, raised up his kids with love. He always made little toys and things for his grandkids. I never met him, but he's got this legacy of just being a people person and loving kids. I'm like, oh wow, I have a lot of that in me. But Ma was she was tough because she would talk trash, but she would still love you, but she would talk trash. Like I have a cousin who used to be really overweight, and she said, oh, you're gonna break up my chairs. Oh, you better not sit down here, you're gonna break up all my chairs. And I'm like, Ma, you can't say that. And because she's deaf, you gotta yell at her, right? So it's hard to keep a secret. Ma, stop talking about him like that. And she's like, I can hear him, stop yelling at me. And I'm like, I have to yell at you. So there were a lot of frustrating conversations. And but she had no filter, which was refreshing at times, right? She didn't put on airs. She did not put on airs. She would tell it like it was, and she would need to see your mouth so she could read your lips. So she was a very engaged interlocutor, as we say, a very engaged conversant or partner in dialogue, because she really had to tune into you. So she also taught us how to listen well, right? But Mo was a character, to say the least. She knew all the latest gossip because people thought she couldn't hear, but she could read some lips like a champ. So she worked in places like the hairdresser and salons and things. So she'd be the cleaning woman, cleaning up, and she'd be catching. They didn't realize she was catching more gossip than dirt. Actually catching some dirt, metaphorically speaking. So she could come back home and tell us all of the gossip going on in town because she was taking it all in, and that was her thrill. But then every night, I remember this, every night before bed, she would get open the Bible and she would read it and she would write her devotional. I mean, like clockwork. So back to that faithfulness, right? So she taught me that there can be many sides to a person, and you just embrace all of them and love them for who they are, and be grateful that they're in your life, loving you back. You know?
Mm. And I love that. I'm very close to my family. I was very close to my grandparents, and I just think what our grandparents teach us is so important. Their presence is so important in our
Oh yeah.
lives.
There's a part in the show where I mentioned my grandmother Jean. That's my mother's mother, who phenotypically is white, but don't tell her that she is a black woman, right? And we get into colorism in the show, which I think is really helpful because a lot of people don't even know what that is, much less how that plays out. Another binary that I use in the show is this notion of roots and routes. So I have to have this talk with my son, and I'm trying to figure out what is the root of that talk. How did we get here? So I dig back down into Emmett Till, right? I dig back down into Trayvon Martin. What are the roots of this? But then I allow my ancestors and great writers like James Baldwin and Langston Hughes to kind of help me work through the routes of a better way. How did we get here, but how will we get beyond this? And my grandma Jean has these beautiful blue eyes that sometimes turn gray. And she has this beautiful part in the show. And she's always said this to me. She's like, well, honey, we have a little bit of everything in us. Scottish, Irish, English, some Blackfoot Indian on my mama's side, and a little bit of Hebrew on my daddy's side. Now, some of our family passes for white, but we know who we are, honey. We are Black and we are proud of it. And to hear a woman who looks white saying that, it's just like ironic on all these levels, but it's also endearing and it's true and it's real, right? And so my mother grew up looking more like her mother. So my mother grew up as a white girl, so to speak, phenotypically speaking, in terms of her appearance in a Black community. And she loves being Black. She loves having Black children. But she's always been seen as an outsider on the inside. So I grapple with that in the show. And my mom was always a really tough lady. She's sweet in her own way, but you don't see my mom crying a lot. Like my brother's funeral, she cried. I can count on my fingers how many times my mom's cried. And I remember her talking to me about what it was like being seen as that white girl over there in her own community where you expect to be loved. That's home, right? And she said, she used this word, she said, that was horrendous. And she paused and her voice cracked. And there's something about hearing your mama cry. Your mama, the one who changed your diapers, and whenever you cried, she came to you, and it was like, whoa! It really hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just started writing, and I had to write that into the show. Initially, the show was about Black men and my sons, and I realized, no, this story is about all of us and what it's like to be othered from multiple sides. But so I kid about that. My grandma Jean, even though she's kind of a point of comedy in the show, she's also a part of what lifts the story up. Like she's also lived in the Black community as a white woman, but she let that lift her up and said, no, I'm gonna be Black, and that's what it is. And so I love the fact that people digest these misunderstandings, these hurts, these abuses, you can call them what you want, microaggressions or whatever, in different ways. And my grandparents especially have taught me resilience because they didn't really have options. There was no place to take their complaints. You just had to figure it out. So.
Well, and I love that you explore and talk about colorism in the show, because I I think as we confront our own upbringing, our own familial history surrounding race, at least for me, um, it's really understanding colorism is a big part of it. And I say that a conversation my dad and I very close to my parents, and we talk about politics a lot lately because all they have to do right now is sit and watch TV and then debrief me on politics. I never have to watch the news because when I talk to my parents at night, they will debrief me on everything that's happened in the world. But one person I'm obsessed with right now is Stacey Abrams. I really believe that Stacey Abrams should be a vice presidential candidate. Yeah,
Oh, she's and I'll say, finish your point though, because I have a thought about colorism with that. Go on.
well, and maybe we're going to the same place with this. So my dad and I had this conversation, and I was telling him, I'm obsessed with Stacey Abrams. I love to interview her. She's on my bucket list of people to interview. But because she's a theater person, she's a closet theater person, but she
I
did
didn't know
study.
that. Okay, great.
Yes, she studied with Lynn Nottage. I mean, she's like, yeah, she's a closet theater person. So I really want to bring her on the show. But my dad and I had this conversation, and my dad said, I think she is too Black to become our vice president. Wow. I think we need someone more like Kamala Harris, who's also really a strong, wonderful person. But I was like, well, what is about her that would make her more qualified? And when we broke it down, the conversation, it was she looks more white. She's a and somebody, and I'm saying this, I had a conversation with someone else a few weeks ago about colorism. It's more like she's a digestible Black person. And that made me so sad. And that's where my own exploration about colorism has happened, because I was like, it shouldn't be about that. It should be about who is best for this job.
And remember what we talked about, that other binary, what should be and what is, right? What I love about Stacey Abrams is she doesn't fit the cookie cutter. She's a larger woman, or a full-figured woman, right? So she's not the little petite Barbie. She's a browner skinned woman, beautiful brown skin. She keeps her hair natural. I love that because she is the picture. I think about Shirley Chisholm. I think about Fannie Lou Hamer. I think about Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and so many others, right, who have come along, and they have been beautiful and bold in all their Blackness. And the only thing you can have against them is you just don't look the part. Really? because she doesn't look the part, but she's smart, she's sharp, and so I love the fact that she's causing some uncomfortable conversations, and she's causing people to admit what you so beautifully said, that it's just not as digestible to me. And that may make you feel icky and it may make you feel bad about things, but it is what it is. Let's address that. Let's talk about why it's not digestible. Let's go find some way to make it more digestible, because it's beautiful, it's natural, it is what it is, right? And let's check ourselves. Let's check ourselves on that. In the show, I talk about Barack Obama, and I think that a lot of white folks, just to be honest, let themselves off the hook. We had our first black president, and I break that up a little bit in the context of colorism. I say, well, hold on, hold on a second. Barack Obama was technically the first mixed race president. See, his father, Barack Hussein Obama, was from the Luo people in Kenya, very black. It doesn't get much black in that. His mother, Ann Dunham, was very white, born in Wichita, Kansas, to people of English, Irish, and German descent. So Barack Obama was just as much the first black president with white ancestry as he was the first white president with black ancestry that we know of. And yet Barack Obama has no legal or practical claim to his whiteness. But he could claim to be white, but you and I would both call him delusional for it. Any American school child will look at Barack Obama, president or not, and say, that's a black man. The operative word here being black. And that's my concern, is that white America and black America and America at large, Western culture, has a very hard time digesting blackness outside of the context of labor, outside of the context of criminality and dehumanization, because we've been conditioned that way. How does a Christian society that believes in loving your neighbor, even loving your enemy, enslave a whole race of people, rape them, separate them from their families, beat them, work them to the bone, and still feel good about themselves? I got it. I don't digest their humanity. I see their blackness and I allow them to be animals. And when they're animals, I'm not really doing that to my brother. They're not even human enough to be my enemy, whom I'm supposed to love. They're just animals. They are a means to an end. And we have never fully taken that layer off of our eyes. Those scales have not fully dropped from our eyes. That's why it's hard to digest. Even to liberal people, it's hard to digest, and they can't quite put their finger on it because we've been conditioned as such. That's why we got to get to the roots of it. When we acknowledge the roots, put light on those roots, we can forage new routes and new understandings and start to digest the difference. Instead of putting it into a hierarchy, just say, oh, that's different. Your hair is natural. One thing that a lot of my sisters, my African sisters, or my sisters of African descent, tell me that they wish people would know is, when I wear my hair natural, don't make a comment about it, because that is natural. That is what it's supposed to be. Oftentimes, my wife will tell you, whenever she's in the military, whenever she puts her hair back into a bun and it's slicked back and it's straight, she gets the most compliments. Though she has beautiful hair, full, beautiful hair, but it's when it's straight and tight and clean and the most European that it can possibly look, when everybody, black, white, and everyone else, gives her the compliments. Why is that? Because her blackness is not as digestible as the more European, the more Western approach to things. And that just is what it is. I'm not mad about it. Listen, as much as I'm a hustler, I'm also about hope. We can get better, but we got to acknowledge the problem first.
We have to start there, and especially now, I think we're facing a timeline, a time crunch, because we have an election coming up, and we're going to have to face these conversations sooner than later.
Right. There's this divide and conquer thing that's going on that's really making me nervous. It's happening on the national level and within the parties. I was just watching, Tim Scott, a senator, the only black senator on the floor right now, and he was just trying to pass some police reform. And there was so much division that we couldn't all agree on just like police reform. Let's get started somewhere, right? Because the issue that's happening right now is there needs to be police reform. There needs to be more respect. There needs to be more de-escalation, more civility amongst the police force. There needs to be accountability, right? And I understand that whatever bill that he presented was not favorable or was not acceptable to some other people. But at some point, we got to do something. And he made a great point. It broke my heart. He gave this 30-minute speech about it. He said, the problem is that if this doesn't get passed now, when is it going to get passed? There are people in the street right now who need police reform, and it's not getting passed. And my thought is, if we're going to forge new routes, let's be honest with where we are. Let's take steps forward. It's a process. So while you say, yeah, Lauren, it's a time crunch, you're right. But people don't grow and change in snapshots. They don't grow and change in spurts. They grow and change by a process. I meet you where you are, not where I want you to be. I love you for whom you are, not who I want you to be. Then and only then can I lead you where I believe you need to go. That's a True Pettigrew maxism. True Pettigrew's a buddy of mine. He's got a program, a company called True Access. And he works with Tony Godwin in Cary, North Carolina. And they've got this cool bridge builder program where they have a monthly barbershop rap session where police officers in Cary go to a local barbershop there in Cary called Headliners every Saturday. Now with COVID, it's kind of changed, but they fill the room. It's standing room only, men, women, different races and backgrounds, having honest conversations about policing. That's the kind of, that needs to be funded, right? That's the kind of reform we need to see. Instead, people go to their respective quarters and they don't come and build those bridges. And so True has really taught me about the importance of the is as opposed to the should, and about meeting people where they are and allowing it to be a process. So while you're right, November is going to come soon, there's a lot of change that needs to happen. At some point, we have to kind of grow together and go through the process and stop demanding absolute allegiance from other people. Another good friend of mine, Kazi, from a show called Intelligently Ratchet. You can find it on Facebook. Kazi was on a talk back with me with Chief Police Blue from Chapel Hill after we did the show in Chapel Hill, the talk. He said, I want you to consider this. If you want everybody around you to be woke, right, that means you have to wake them up. Now, would you prefer to be awakened by a big bucket of ice water poured onto your face and chest, or to have somebody say, hey, listen, shh, come on, wake up? Most of us, 99% of us, maybe even all of us, would prefer the latter, right? Not the former. But sadly, nowadays, because it's time crunch, we're anxious, we gotta move. People are not giving each other space to grow. People are not giving each other space to go through the process. Relationship is process. When I met my wife, I didn't just show up and say, hey, let's get married. We had to get to know each other first. And there's some things to this day we still disagree on, but we love each other and we're not going anywhere. And that's what we have to respect as a process. And that's what the show, The Talk, is about. For an hour and 20 minutes, I go through a process of sharing my family with you and engaging. And we come to this place where our guards are let down. You realize that I'm not calling you out, I'm calling you in. And the conversations, Lauren, we have after the show, mind-blowing. I've had white people admit things I never thought I would hear a white person say in public. And it's in a place where we're all being courageous and sharing, and nobody's offended. We're just like, oh, never knew that. Now I see why. I've had black people, I had this young black man say to me, there's this part in the show where I have asked everyone to close their eyes. And I say the word black man. And I give everyone permission to say black man, because a lot of the white people are like, I don't know if I, right? No, say it. We need to say it. It is what it is. And this black man, handsome, strong, professional black man, after the show, he said, I'm ashamed to admit, but when you asked me to imagine black man, I felt fear. I felt fear, and I don't even know what to do with that. So to understand that racism cuts across and through all these lines, it's not white versus black, it's not the oppressor and the enslaved, it is all of us operating in this misunderstanding, this indigestion. I'm gonna use that from now on. We have this indigestion for blackness. It is what it is. It shows itself in colorism when it's black against black or colored person against colored person. It shows itself in overt white supremacy. But the problem is not just in that one bad apple or not just a whiteness that's trying to kill a blackness. It is our nation's indigestion with blackness. We naturally, for some reason, our first order thinking is to dehumanize, to animalize, to criminalize blackness, sight unseen. And that's a problem. Let's name it, let's own it, and let's do better.
Mm. One thing you and I both have in common, sadly, is that we both lost our brothers. My brother died a few years ago, and it was life altering for me. It sounds like, from what I've seen in other interviews, your brother's death was life altering for you. Can you talk to me about how his death helped you find your purpose?
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, it wasn't until I was on the State of Things with Frank Stacey that I even acknowledged this. It's one of those things, you know, so many layers make us who we are. That's why I love theater, right? Because theater makes you unravel yourself and figure out your motivation. And I realized that so much of my commitment to sitting in the room with people having uncomfortable conversations and looking them in the eye, even virtually. I'm looking in your eyes right now, and loving them for whom they are right now. So much of that is born of my desperate desire to make up for the time lost with my brother. You know, my brother Brent was always the type A, just focused, superstar, valedictorian kind of guy. And the reason why I went into the Air Force was because he went to the Air Force Academy. The reason why I did well in school was because I was chasing after him and always trying to compete. I never won, but I always wanted to, kind of compete. He was my hero. He was the embodiment of hustle and hope. Like he took that hustle pill from birth, and even I was kind of like Ferdinand. I just wanted to, smell the flowers and enjoy childhood. But he was like hard charging. He got involved with acting on his own. He told my parents, "Hey, I want to get into an acting class. I want to do acting." Before we knew it, within a year, he was working his first SAG job in LA. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll try that too. That's how I became an actor, because my brother did it first, because he had this harebrained idea. And then he decided he wanted to be a pilot. He wanted to go to the Air Force. So he went to the Air Force Academy, one of the top schools in the land, right? And then when he was there, he realized he couldn't be a pilot because he didn't have the vision, but he still finished up with the Air Force. And I thought, well, my father's a teacher. My mother does in-home daycare. Let me do an Air Force ROTC scholarship at Stanford. And so I followed in his footsteps in a lot of ways. And he even though we were at each other's throats a lot of our childhood, he had been my hero always. And so when we were both in our 20s, I believe it was 2002. I have to do the math there. I think I was like 26 and he was 29. He's 3 years ahead of me. In that time, he was going through a lot in his life. He was going through, if I were to diagnose it now, there was some manic depression, some bipolarity going on. He did really high highs, really low lows, but he was highly functional, right? He was doing fine in the Air Force. He was a recruiter at the University of Miami with the Air Force, still an officer. And I remember just seeing him hurting and knowing there was something wrong, but he was my senior. He's my big brother. He's my hero. Number one, I'm not qualified to speak into his life. And number two, if I pull back the curtain, might he be so offended or so made to feel so vulnerable that it would hurt him more than what he's already hurt, right? To know that his little brother knows he's hurting, right? So it's one of those things where you just kind of just get through it. Like, I know you're hurting, but I don't know what to do about it. Mm. And he, at some point, hit one of his low lows and wasn't able to come up from it and took his own life. He was living in Miami, on Miami Beach. I mean, it was a lovely life for all intents and purposes. He was living, Air Force salary, doing great, captain in the Air Force. And I'm a captain in the Air Force at the time. And I remember being at his funeral and these lovely stories coming across about how he was bigger than life. He was amazing. We hear this a lot of times, right? Whether it's John Belushi or, just these people who are just amazing, Robin Williams, but they had their own secret depression in dark places, but they couldn't pull themselves out. And after hearing all these stories, I remember saluting my brother's casket and thinking, wow, I never got to salute him alive, because I was in North Carolina and he was in Miami. We were never together in uniform. I never got to show him that respect. And I came to learn that the respect I wish I would have shown him would have been to salute his humanity and say, bruh, I know you're hurting and I don't know the solution. And I feel real uncomfortable addressing this because I'm just your little brother. I don't know nothing, but we got to get help. I love you too much to let you go through this alone. And that's a regret I'll always hold with me. I teach, whether I'm teaching kids in church or teaching my own kids, I say the pain of regret, y'all, is one you can't take away. I'd much rather put myself through the pain of self-discipline, the pain of taking a chance and falling on my face, but the pain of regret, I can't get that time back. So I think a lot of what you see in me when I engage an audience or an individual in my performances, in my teaching, is me just refusing to ever feel that pain of regret again, refusing to ever let a person leave my presence without checking in, even if it's uncomfortable, and saying, I'm gonna sit here with you. I may have to agree to disagree with you, but I'm gonna love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what I bring. I tell my students all the time. I get stellar reports, stellar feedback from my students. He's one of the greatest professors I've ever had, and it's not because my father was a teacher, so it's just a family business, right? It's not because I'm necessarily a great teacher, but I lead with love. I learned that from Jesus Christ. I put skin in the game. I lead with my own vulnerability. I'll be the first one to drop tears and let you know I'm human too. And I lead with love. And guess what? I loved you first just because you showed up. Now what you gonna do with that, right? And people don't know what to do with that, but either love back or at least receive it and kind of figure some things out. And I know it's a process, so you'll come along when you do, but I'm not gonna stop loving you.
I love that. The play opens with you driving your son to school and the news of Freddie Gray's death is heard over the radio. And that becomes the impetus for the talk and the foundation for the plays. So, can you talk to me about the real moment when you're in the car and news comes over the radio and you're looking in the rearview mirror at your son in the back seat?
Yeah, I open up the show with a poem. I've only just submitted, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, can't refuse it, didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I'm a sufferer if I lose it, give an account if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it. And I'd memorized that poem by Benjamin E. Mays, the first, I believe, president of Morehouse College. And he was a great scholar, but he wrote some wonderful pieces. And that's one piece that I've memorized. And in my mentoring groups with boys over the years, someone brought it to my attention and I had boys memorize it. I would memorize it. We would talk about how you got to take advantage of that moment that's in front of you, right? Back to my whole notion of like, don't ever give in to regret. Don't ever suffer the pain of regret. Take the moment, seize the day, carpe diem is what it is always meant to me. But interestingly enough, that first scene of the play I call Crash. There's no car crash in the scene, but it's a crash of reality hitting my own life. And in that 1 minute, I had to find a way to explain to this beautiful brown-skinned 7-year-old in my backseat his all-encompassing blackness and what that could mean to him at any given moment that could end his life or his peace or his safety or his freedom, right? And I literally did not spend more than a minute, maybe two, having this talk. It was very much, I used to be in the military and I would give, I was an intelligence officer. So I would give briefings to aircrew leaving out of Pope Air Force Base, which is now Pope Army Airfield, but the aircrew would fly out and I would give them a briefing. Hey, these are the threats. There's small arm fire that's been seen in this area, possible rocket propelled grenades. Hey, there's a surface to air missile over here. Stay out of that threat ring, right? So it was almost like an intelligence briefing that I'm giving this 7-year-old now. He's going to school. I should really be checking with him on like, did he eat his vegetables or not, which is how I start, right? I'm like, hey, don't bring any broccoli back to my house, right? We have these rules. Fun stuff, right? Fun for me, not for him. But it's endearing. It's a sweet moment. As Joseph always says, I am the quintessential doting father. I look at my children much the same way my father looks at me, and I just stare at them sometimes. And they're like, what? And I'm just like, God is great. Look at you. You have a clavicle on either side and ears, and you think, and you kind of look like me a little bit, but you also look like your. It's just amazing to me. Like, it's like, wow, right? And so for me, fathering is the most important, most fulfilling job I've ever had, no matter, even on its worst day. And so I'm looking at this beautiful treasure, and I've got to somehow, with my words, prepare him for people that won't see him as the treasure. The meanings of names mean a lot to me. So Sterling, I named him on purpose. It means little star, pure and thoroughly excellent. That's how I see him and always will see him, right? But I know people in the world will not always see him that way. So when I heard about the riots, and I knew they were coming because I've been keeping up with the news, but somehow Sterling hadn't heard about Freddie Gray yet. And I wasn't sure how I was going to break it to him. His little brother Langston was 4 at the time, so it wasn't even something I was going to worry about with Langston. And I called the scene Crash because when they said Freddie Gray died, not only did I first learn that Freddie Gray died, but then I had to somehow stop the world and prepare this little boy for conversations and realities that he would face. And within about a minute or two, it was almost like an out-of-body experience. I can't tell you exactly what I said, but in the play, I try to reenact about what I said. I just basically told him very quickly what my ancestors told my forefathers and what my father told me. Hey, look, you're different than other kids. Some people won't see you the way they should see you. You got to be careful out there. Here are some things you need to do to be careful. I need you to be smart and be attentive and be gentle. And Sterling's a bigger, stronger guy. He's always been taller than the other kids in his classroom. He has beautiful chocolate skin that he gets from his mother. So he doesn't have the privilege of lighter skin like I do. Let's acknowledge that, right? I'm quite digestible to some people. My nose is not quite pointy, but it's not quite, flatter and wider like a James Baldwin nose, right? There's some visuals, some optics that I bring to the table that make me more digestible, not to mention a nice smile and a charisma, right? Kid doesn't know how to play that yet. He just knows how to play with candy and toys and. And so I'm trying to hip him to the game. You're a bigger dude. You're a darker dude. You don't know how to finesse people yet. Be careful out there. And after that minute, no more than 2-minute conversation, it's time for him to go to school. Love you, son. Go to school. Literally about a week or 2 weeks later, I'm in downtown Fayetteville, and I don't know what set it off. I just started thinking about the fact that I'd given the talk to my son. And I just started weeping. And I've never experienced anything like that before. It's trauma, right? When trauma happens, it pops up whenever it wants. I didn't know what to call it that time. I just felt really sad, really sorrowful. I didn't know why, because Sterling didn't seem to be too upset about it. And I just started writing on my phone, started typing in something that became Sterling's story. And so from that 1 minute conversation is this whole exploration of the roots and the routes of that conversation and how we've got to do better. I should not have to have that talk with my son. No one should have to have that talk with their child. And so it turned into an 8 minute piece called Sterling Story. And I shared it with Joseph Meagle because I was pursuing my PhD at that time. He's one of my mentors and one of my professors. And Joseph looked at this and he said, babe, there's so much more to this. Babe, you got to do much more here. And he called me babe, which makes me feel like I'm cool, LA, New York kind of guy. I love it. But also makes me feel loved because Joseph also has that gift of being able to grab people who are with him and just tell it like it is. He's a little more honest than I am, and just engage him and look him in the eye. And the first time I told him the story, he wept. And I think just about every time we perform the talk, if he's in the audience, he weeps, and I weep, and we cry together. And there's some beautiful connective energy that comes with that, with crying together, right? And so we, over the course of about 2 years, that I wrote the story in 2015. I took Joseph's class in 2016. I took it again in 2017. So over the course of 2 years, we worked through this piece as an original piece that was part term paper and analysis of racism in America, part therapy for a daddy trying to figure things out, in part the greatest piece of theater that's ever come out of me because it just from my core and it engages audiences in ways I never could have predicted. And so we've developed this piece. So Joseph was a dramaturg, a professor, and a mentor, and then he also graced me as a director. And so this piece, it's funny, he's met my mother and father now, but I feel like Joseph knows my family because he'll say things like, no, babe, that doesn't work. I don't believe that. And we would, when you're doing a one-man show, you don't get a lot of breaks. You can't like go to the green room while somebody else works another scene. So we'd be like 4-hour stints, just like working and working. And he would never let me off the hook. It was all I could do not to feel resentful toward him. Like, Joseph, I'm tired. I've done it a million times. It's my story. It's not even yours. But it was his. It was ours. It became our story, not in the sense of appropriation, but appreciation, right? And true connection. And so I trusted him, and I trust him. And so, he became a choreographer and a director and a bit of a therapist for me. He would stop and ask, well, what do you really feel about that? Because I can't tell what you feel about that. And he would tell me, stop telegraphing, stop telling me, and just show me. And so a lot of what you see with me melding between the characters is me fighting my instinct to pivot from one character to another and say, hey, look at me, I can be a good actor. Look at my impression of Obama. And say, no, it's not a show, it's not pageantry. Feel. If we're talking about roots, dig in deep and feel those roots and just let the audience figure it out with you. Because that's what I'm doing in this minute, right? It's an 80-minute play, but it really is playing out what happened to me in a minute, trying to figure this thing out and struggle with it and grapple with it and refuse to let go of it. And then it turns into this beautiful piece of work because I think a lot of people, like you've already expressed, can understand and relate to the struggle that we feel when we have to have uncomfortable conversations or deal with uncomfortable concepts that are sometimes our own issues, right? And so in the show, I have my own issues I'm trying to deal with. I by no means give a perfect talk to my son, right? But I'm willing to let the audience in to kind of work it out with me in this minute that's been expanded to 80 minutes of performance.
I love that. For me, again, going back to gateways, um, for me, the school to prison pipeline was my first gateway into having a courageous conversation about race. I participated in a 6-week class workshop that was called Study Circles, which at the time was offered by the YWCA as a way to bridge the achievement gap in my son's school, in all our schools. But the study circle we were doing was at Moore Square Middle School, and it was to bridge the achievement gap there. And one thing we talked about a lot was the school to prison pipeline. And this was the first time in my adult life that I had ever even heard that term. And it became a springboard to me unlocking a lot of my own hangups about race and racism, how I was raised. there's a lot of discussion right now about the necessary and long overdue policy changes and reforms that you were talking about earlier, not only in the police department and justice system, but in our schools. How do we use this moment to move from protest to actual policy change? Or, like you and I were talking about before we went on camera, how do we use this moment to become a movement, not just, okay, one and done, it's been a month, now let's all go back to our regular lives?
I think that's a great point, and I'm glad you're asking that question. And I want more people to ask that question. I think the way that we get traction for this movement, which I think has become a movement, just in terms of seeing how quickly justice has been handed out to some of the officers, how quickly people have started turning over bills in Congress and the Senate trying to get things done. There's definitely a momentum going forward. I think what we have to remember to do, which is all too often forgotten, is that we have to remember to have a dialogue. And it's a dialogue that requires multiple people in the room that may disagree, and that's okay. And I know some people disagree with me on this, but the fact that you like Confederate monuments or that you like the Confederate flag is not an existential issue for me. I don't believe you want me to die or you want me to become a slave again. I believe there's some things you don't understand about what it does to me in my heart and my mind. And if we become friends and we have a dialogue and I listen to you and you listen to me, I think I can bring you to that place where we have a deeper understanding. Daryl Davis does some work. He's got a Netflix film. I think it's called Courtesies. It's got the name Courtesies in it. He has a TED Talk as well. But I was just talking to a friend about his piece today. He's one Black man who has conversations with KKK members, which I find kind of hard to digest myself, but he's got this gift of grace. And he now boasts that over 200 people who were in the KKK are no longer in the KKK because they've got to know him and he went through the process with them. And so I'm really interested in trying to do that work with the talk and trying to get people to say, yes, we need to change policy and we need to change policy together. Otherwise, it's a mutiny, it's a takeover, it's a revolution. I like the word revolution meaning a turn. I don't like the word revolution meaning I destroy everything that's here already and I make something new. Because there's a lot of good stuff here. I teach Shakespeare, love Shakespeare. I refuse to refer to Shakespeare as a dead white male. I'm not going to talk about him because he's a colonist. That just, it doesn't jibe with my sensibility for seeing genius, seeing beauty, and making beauty from ashes. That's what my God does. That's what I've been gifted to do. I bring an electricity into the room and I will have a dialogue with you. And we will agree to disagree on some things, but we will find some traction and turn this into a movement. Let me give you an example. And again, people will disagree with me, but I'm learning. I'm trying to walk on this narrow path that requires dialogue and input and connection. And I'm going to always have people disagree with me. But in Fayetteville here, we have a street sign that's been put up around the Market House. The Market House is a landmark here that's traditionally a place where slaves were sold. It's very problematic and it needs to be put into context. Something needs to be done. But one thing that the city has decided to do is put a street sign around the Market House. It's a circle, traffic circle. The street sign says Black lives do matter. There are a lot of people far left or even on the left who say, why can't it just say Black lives matter? Why does it have to say Black lives do matter? There are people on the right who say, we don't really like Black Lives Matter because there's been some associations, some anti-police associations, some anti-whiteness association with the term Black Lives Matter. Now, there are some misunderstandings and miscommunications on all sides. But I personally think that Black lives do matter is a compromise I'm down with because the fact is Black lives do matter. Actually, I like the do because it makes it more definitive and it makes it separate from all of the preconceived notions that some people on the right have with Black Lives Matter. And I will just say Black Lives Matter has three different valences for me. Number one, it's a personal true statement that I think we all need to believe. Understanding it's not mutually exclusive with white lives. White lives matter. They just have always mattered. And it's been clear to us that they matter. It's just not clear that Black lives matter, the way we treat Black people, the way we digest them. Love that. I'm going to use that for everyone. But so Black Lives Matter to me is a personal statement of truth. Black Lives Matter is also a movement that started out of three women who said, you know what, I'm tired of seeing all this happening in the wake of Trayvon Martin, his death, and then George, his killer's acquittal. So they came up with Black Lives Matter as a movement. And then thirdly, we have an organization now that's called Black Lives Matter. There are multiple sites and organizations. It's not clear who the exact leadership is, but those are three ways that Black Lives Matter operates and performs in the world. I personally seen, I know a lot of conservative people have seen people with the Black Lives Matter banner also saying kill the pigs, also saying kill Whitey. That's problematic for me. I disagree. I think cops are great. Bad cops need to go. But I will never say I condemn the term kill Whitey or kill pigs. There's no conversation to that. I'm a communication expert. I can't communicate once I've dehumanized you. My people have seen that for centuries. I'm not going to do that. So with that said, I get why some people on the right are averse to using the term Black Lives Matter in that context of seeing it as an organization that has sometimes been, in my opinion, kind of its notion or its ideal has been perverted to go into anti-whiteness and anti-police issues. I'd like to tell them that's not the case, in the sense that Black Lives Matter does not mean anti-whiteness or anti-police. There are a few bad apples, just like, people on the right. You get a neo-Nazi jump up, he doesn't represent everybody on the right. With that said, I get it because I'm listening to both sides. And yeah, I'm uncomfortable with a little bit about both what they're saying, but I'll take Black Lives Do Matter and I will empower it. I will mobilize it, just like my people have done for so long. You gave us the guts of a pig. We made chitlins, right? We learned how to make things, make beauty. You gave us sorrow and a stick, and then you got jazz and you got blues, right? We know how to make things out of nothing. And so I'm all right with change and transformation, not having to stick with certain tropes or certain understandings of what a movement needs to be. I think a movement just does that. It moves. So it transforms, it adjusts, it listens, it pays attention, it takes a left or a right when it sees, I'm not talking about acquiescence. I'm not talking about sitting on the fence and being lukewarm. I'm talking about being effective and pragmatic and getting traction and making real change, right? Get away from your talking points, because that's just what they are. They're just talking. I want you to get to listening, all sides listening. We'll share, we'll talk, but let's talk person to person, not just some bullet list that that says our party is always right at all times and you all are the bad ones, right? Mm-hmm. So I hope I answered your question, but that's what's been on my mind a lot lately.
One thing, when we spoke a couple weeks ago, initially, and there was something that you said that really stuck with me. And I kind of want you to expand upon it for our audience, especially our white audience. There are so many people right now talking about wanting to be an ally.
You probably see a shadow here. It's COVID-19. Come on, son. You have a question. This is Langston. He has a question.
No, the question to you.
Okay, quickly, because I'm doing an interview. It's live.
Oh, never mind.
Never. Oh, thank you for your courtesy. I appreciate you. Carry on. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Langston. This is real life. This is Zoom.
You say when someone, he says, you're welcome.
Oh, thank you, Langston. I love that name, by the way. Oh,
yeah. We love it for many, many reasons. I'm just quickly repeat that question.
Okay, so when we initially spoke a few weeks ago, I had mentioned to you wanting to be an ally, and something you said when I said that, it just struck me and it stuck with me for the last few weeks. You told me you didn't want me to be an ally. You wanted me to be a sister and a friend, because if we're friends and we're family, then we can have difficult discussions. We can disagree, we can argue, and then we can still come to the table and break bread together and love each other.
That's it. I'm glad that you brought that up. There are two points that came up in our conversation that really moved me. Number one, when you say family, that's so important that we understand each other as family. We're in this thing together, whether we like it or not. And the fact is that allies are people who fight wars with us, then they return to their respective fronts or countries. America, we're allies with France and with England, et cetera. They have different languages, different accents, different cultures. They're going to go home after the war. We're going to come back here together. I don't want an ally. And I know, again, that's not popular to a lot of people, but I want a country person that's going to say, hey, I'm going to do my best to do right by you and to make this country better. Acknowledging the fact that this country was founded on stealing people's land, enslaving people, and exactly, that. And what should have happened did not happen. But what is. And we're here together. And in my opinion, we are family, or we can be family. Now, don't assume that you understand everything about me, because I don't understand everything about my people in my family. Don't assume that, we have the same struggles. That's offensive. But to say, I care enough to stay in this room with you because family's family and we don't go anywhere, even when we disagree, because there's a root here, a connection that is going to inform the routes that we take going forward. And so for me, that's what the talk brings. That's why I think the most important compliment I had after a show was a white male who stood up, cis hetero white male, like the archetypical, American patriarch. He said, you know what? I want to thank you for calling me in and not calling me out. Because the fact is that he's been called out a whole lot. And I'm watching these white guys. I teach them in my classrooms. And when I talk to them, it breaks my heart to see when race comes up or gender comes up or a difficult conversation, they cower. Not because they want to hold on to their power always. Sometimes that's the case. We need to address that. But oftentimes they cower because they don't know what to say, because they're not used to being treated like family. They're used to being treated like the oppressor, the patriarch. He is the picture of oppression, and he gets shut down and silenced. And every time he does say something, he may offend somebody. So he just shuts up and he'll take the B. He'd rather not participate. And I'm like, no, we need to make area spaces of courage. I don't want to create safe spaces for anybody. There's nothing safe here. Black people ain't been safe in this country. Let's not be safe. Let's be courageous. But once you've been courageous and shared your thought, whether it's out of ignorance or out of anger or passion, whatever it is, stay in the space and hear my thought as well, right? And the second point that you really helped to bring to light for me was you had a great idea. You were like, I'm kind of thinking about how this might play on the audio. We're talking about doing an audio version of it, et cetera. And I was listening to you because you have years of experience with this. You said, I don't want to overstep my bounds. I said, no, stop right there. If you have a gift and it's going to make this ship go float better, or this airplane fly higher, then share that gift. Just because you're white does not mean that you don't have the right to share solutions, to get involved, to put your skin in the game, to bring your kids with my kids and all of us talk together and figure it out. Because the more we do that, the more we back up and say, well, I don't know if we start playing oppression Olympics. My people haven't been oppressed. I mean, I'm Jewish, but the more we do that, the more we distract ourselves and we don't put the thrust into this thing that needs to go up. But we also are doing the same thing that's been done to my people for so long. Well, you're not quite human. You're 3/5 of a human. You can have a little bit of a vote, but you got to be able to read. Okay, you can vote, but we're not going to you can't vote on Sunday. Like all this limited dehumanization, this secret, obfuscated dehumanization of each other. We pretend like it's civility, but it's not civility. It's not humility. It's copping out. And so I refuse to let people cop out. Come into this courageous space, share your ideas. If they don't fly, then they don't fly. If you fall on your face and you offend me, I'll let you know. But guess what? You're family, so I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to tell you offended me, and I'm going to ask you to please do better in the future. And we're going to look at each other, and we're not going to be politically correct. We're going to be personally connected.
That's the key. That's the key, is the personal connection. That's what I mean when I talk about these gateways, is where's the connection? Where's the entry point to you and I being able to connect and have a conversation? Talk to me about the role theater has in affecting change or social justice.
I think that one of the few places where Americans, and I just speak from my own American sensibility, one of the few places where Americans get together and really connect is in entertainment. Oftentimes it's sports, and more often than not, it's TV, it's movies, right? Somebody mentioned the other day that, All in the Family, people love that show. Archie Bunker was one of the most racist people in the world, but people but they also acknowledge the fact that he was kind of a buffoon in that part of him, but he wasn't a buffoon entirely as a character, but his racism was buffoonery, right? And we all had this understanding, or most of us did, I hope, had this understanding and this sensibility of it. And he became part of our families. And then George Jefferson came along with his own issues and isms, right? And we learned to love him and laugh at him and laugh with him, right? So for me, what theater does, what acting and performance does, is it connects us on this common ground, because we all know what it is to love and to empathize with the character and to feel their hurt or to hate a villain, etc. And so it forms our sensibility. It actively participates with that process of transformation, right? Now, when you do live theater, and you do live theater the way I've done it, informed by people like Leanne Bell and Storytelling for Social Justice, informed by people like Augusto Boal and Theater of the Oppressed, and Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this notion of us dialoguing and working together through this process, it becomes even more impactful, in my opinion. You can see the immediate effects of it, because you're not only drawing on the heartstrings of all people. Everybody knows what it is to love a child. I don't know anybody who hasn't loved a child, a niece, a nephew, a child, a son, a daughter, right? So I meet you on that common ground. Everybody knows what it is to be afraid when that child's going to be hurt, whether it's them running into the street or walking into a racist world, right? We can all relate to that. And then we also know what it's like to have these wild and zany elders, grandparents, etc. So I play them. We laugh at them together. Like, yeah, me too. I cannot tell you how many people have thrilled me afterward when I do my grandmother, and they don't look like me. I'm talking about people from India, the country, not like, not like I'm Indian American or Native American. I mean, but like from India, the country, or for people who are white, who are black, like, you were doing my grandmother. I'm like, how? I've never been to India in my life. But there's a human connection that happens there with the theater. And now once your guard is down, we've connected. Now I can start teaching about the school to prison pipeline. So, you know, in the show, I talk about redlining. I define redlining. We get into the school to prison pipeline. We get into what systemic racism really is, in terms of colorism and how people internalize racism, but also the structures of criminal justice and education that tend to kind of mold certain people in certain ways, right? And so there are conversations about tough stuff that you wouldn't be able to digest if we hadn't first met with our grandmothers in the room, right? Someone told me, you brought my grandmother into the room. I was like, whoa, that's really, really cool. Honor to my grandmother, Grace Lillian Kelly, but also to the art, the work that theater can do. Like, if I can bring your grandmother into the room, then I can bring your ear close to the issue and pull your heart close to mine, and we can get some work done here, right? I think that one person told me after the show, and it really helped me to understand why this breaking of the fourth wall and direct address is so important for my work. She said, you would talk to the audience and you weren't looking at me, but I still felt you were looking at me. And I thought, whoa, and it's a theatrical device, right? I've learned how to do this thing over time. You look at one audience member and you switch to another audience member and you engage them so much that all the other audience members know they're on the hot seat. You could look at them at any moment. And somehow they are able to connect to that. And it's almost like having multiple monitors on, and they're all under your gaze, right? And it can be used oppressively, or it can be used to create different moods. But in my case, I use it to connect to multiple people at one time. I only have two eyes, and I can only look at one person at one time. And if you look at it, really, I can only look in one of your eyes at one time, because otherwise I get a headache. I can't look into both your eyes. I'm looking at one or your nose, or I can fix on one point. But somehow theater multiplies me. It multiplies me, and it helps me to jump into your heart, and it helps you. And here's the thing: it's dialogue, helps you to jump into my heart. Because as I'm looking in your eyes, and I see a tear in your eye, and I'm realizing that it's connected to the tear that's in my eye, we have a moment there. And somehow that moment multiplies and it connects to the rest of the audience. And then we have a talk back afterwards so we don't lose that moment. So it can become a movement. A movement that does what? It asks you to invest in things like Boomerang, right? Boomerang Youth org, boomerangyouth.org, for example. So Boomerang is an organization in Chapel Hill in Orange County where they serve the schools there with alternative to suspension programming. So a kid gets suspended, and 70 to 90% of their kids are kids of color, right? Because of the school to prison pipeline and issues in poverty. And there's a lot of issues there, right? But a kid gets suspended, and instead of going home, they go to Boomerang, and they spend time with people who care about them and who listen to them and who connect to them, who are not just allies, but treat them as family, get them their homework from their teachers, and keep them on track so they don't get disconnected. So they inspire them, they build them, they connect them. That's the kind of work we need to be investing in. So that's my ask. After the show, I say, okay, this has been a great moment. The movement is the ask. I'm going to ask you to do three things. Number one, I'm going to ask you to talk to someone who doesn't look like you, live like you, or love like you as you're walking out to your car or to your place of residence. Talk to them and just check in, get to know them, have that personal connection, as we said, right? Number two, I'm going to ask you to go out and talk to people who do look like you about this conversation and challenge them to have that conversation. Not in a punitive way, not in a calling out way, not in a gotcha way, but in a way that says, hey, this is happening in our country. We should probably talk about it and do better. Let's figure that thing out. Understanding process, right? And then number three, I ask you to put your money where your mouth is. Invest in organizations like Boomerang, or in Fayetteville, I work with a program called Find a Friend. So when you go to watch the show, which is available until July 10th, you can click on a link to donate to Find a Friend. Find a Friend has summer programming, after school programming, all free of charge to kids who've had it tough. A lot of kids who are having a hard time in school. Some kids have been bullied. Some kids are bullies. And Find a Friend does this wonderful work of reframing and reclaiming their sense of identity and lifting them up, getting them on board with high school and college, but most importantly, which is a positive, healthy self-concept. And that's something you can do now. Like, click on the show, watch it, make an investment, donate now. Like, that's the ask. That's what turns this moment from catharsis to a movement for transformation.
You mentioned the show is available to watch virtually through July 10th. I know you and I had talked about doing some sort of audio thing. I told you before we went on air, the show is perfect the way it is. I watched it last week. I I will say for myself, it is very hard for me to watch virtual theater. I told you that earlier because in my house, I'm not sitting in a dark room where you have my undivided attention. In my house, I've got my kids. You know, you have Langston walking in. I have things going on. People are arguing around me. Um, you know, laundry needs to be done. The dinner has to be cooked. And this particular show, I really, I want to say it stopped me dead in my tracks. And I said to my husband, I have to start this over and give it my undivided attention. Because when I had first started it, I was like making dinner and paying bills and making my to do list. And it, I think I was about 8 minutes in, and I was like, no, all right. I'm gonna sit down and watch it, and I hope that everyone will do the same
Thank you.
between now
I have
and
to
July
put
10th.
a big thanks to the producers, Bulldog Ensemble Theater. If you go to bulldogdurham.org, you can catch the show there. But also Street Sign Center for Literature and Performance, led by Joseph Meagle and Elizabeth Lewis Corley. And then, of course, Playmakers, Repertory Theater, Vivian Benesh. They've been wonderful partners, and they have all kind of put this together. So on all the respective sites, you can find this. Kiva Fox at Bulldog, I got to give him a shout out. I'm grateful for that they had this idea, because I didn't know that it would play online. And I will say there's a project that I'm working on now called Walking the Talk. It's talking the talk and walking the talk. And that is letting people see the show, especially in this age of social distancing. I'm formatting a workshop where people, whether they're students or individuals in military, I'm going to do it for the USO, for example. I'm also doing it at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. We're going to play the video, and then we're going to go into a live Zoom conversation about talking the talk. Let's get past our discomfort and then move to action items, especially a lot of military leaders. They're commanders, right? I always tell people, in the military was where I felt the least racialized. I felt the most equal to my peers because I was my rank, first and foremost. But even in the military, we have these issues. So there are commanders, thank God for them. There are commanders who want to do better by their people because of this movement that's happening. And so we're going to go into walking the talk. We're going to work through some poetry and let people kind of get loose and use some of the theater of the oppressed stuff that I've learned, and move to this place of action items. What can I do here to make personal connection a priority and to make a difference in my unit? So if you go to sonnykelly.com, you can find me. Well, I'd be glad to connect. I want to do this work live. There's something about putting skin in the game. I love it. I love being there. But if I can't, I'm really encouraged to know, Lauren, that it still plays and connects virtually. And we'll do that for as long as we can or have to. And then once the shadow of COVID-19 lifts, I'll be traveling the world. I've had the pleasure of going to Syracuse with this, and Bristol, Tennessee, and a few other places here in North Carolina, and even all the way as far as Milwaukee. I did it at a school. It was the Salam School it's an Islamic school, and it's a parochial Islamic school. And a friend of mine teaches there, and we did the talk there, and the connections and the conversations that happen in different contexts, right? What I learned from people who live a different life than me. I just learned, for example, that when a Muslim woman wears her hijab, she is pointing herself out and performing her religion and her ethnicity in some ways in public, in ways that Muslim men don't have to do. So they bear the brunt of a lot of the misrecognition and misunderstanding. And so I just say all that to say, I'm learning too, and it's informing me and making me more sensitive, and it's growing me through this process. So let's walk the walk. Let's talk the talk. Let's walk the talk.
Thank you, Sonny, for all of this. I will put all of the links you mentioned in if you're joining us late, you'll be able to watch this live. And when I go back or watch this replay of this on Facebook, on our website, and when I repost the video, I will include all the links that we've discussed so people can donate and watch and learn and connect with you like I have, which I just feel so grateful. So thank you. Virtual
Listen,
hug,
I
virtual.
say this after every show. Hey, I need a hug. So I give out free hugs after the show because I think there's something important about connection. Now, I do want to acknowledge the fact that some people don't like to be touched, and that's I respect that. Physical touch is my love language. So I stand there after every show, and whoever wants to hug me, let's hug. Because sometimes you need a hug to just remind yourself that it's okay. We're in this together. We're gonna do better.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I know you are going to take a little break this week and be with your family. So enjoy your time off.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you soon. I hope to meet you soon, actually in person.
I look forward to it. We need to give each other real hugs, right?
Yes. Thank you so much. Everyone who's following this, come back tonight at 7:30. I'll be having a really beautiful conversation with Vincent and Julia Drayton about interracial marriage. And we're going to talk about love and loving. And we're just going to keep the conversation going, right, Sonny?
I love it. Let's keep talking, and then we can get to walking, right?
Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of the run of the show. Hopefully,
Thank you.
everyone, if you haven't watched it between now and July 10th, watch the talk.
Celebrate our nation's birth on July 4th. Put it on and watch it. It's a great American story. It's Merc.
Oh, it is. That's great. That's no fireworks. You can't go out and watch fireworks, so watch the talk.
I'll
So,
just show it on the screen for you.
yeah. Anyway, thank you, Sonny. Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Go deal with the little people now. Go deal with Langston and Sterling.
Thank you. Keep it up. Keep up the great work, Lauren. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.